Blue Points, Rockaways, Cape Cods, Peconics, Catuits, Oysters. Oysters were once an important pillar of life for New York City, since the first days when Henry Hudson sailed up the river that would be named after him. They helped sustain the local Lenape people before the city's colonization, and at the time when Henry Hudson would sail into the city's quiet harbor, there were around 220,000 acres of oyster reefs. A New York Public Library blog titled History on the Half Shell, The Story of New York City and Its Oysters, documents New York City's history with oysters, and notes that they were once very plentiful and much larger, with the early European settlers describing the shellfish about a foot in length.
I'm gonna give it to for oysters.
Perfect.
This is already washed. The already washed that you've been doing this morning. So this one's to the point. And here we go. Nice and briny oyster.
Oh yeah.
So we do again.
New York City was once considered the oyster capital of the world, a seaport where people could come and visit and enjoy rich, big oysters from the New York harbor. New Yorkers were constantly eating them and were selling them by the millions. They were an important part of the meal for the affluent in the early 1800s and also were an important staple for the poor, who could usually scrounge up some oysters and bread. The New York Public Library blog notes that oysters are very nutritious, rich in protein, phosphorus, iodine, calcium, iron, and vitamins A, B, and C. Pearl Street in Manhattan's financial district got its name because it was once a dumping ground for used oyster shells. The New York Public Library even notes that the road was once paved with oyster shells. In The Big Oyster, a book on the history of the oyster in New York, author Mark Kurlansky writes, "The history of the New York oyster is a history of New York itself. Its wealth, its strength, its excitement, its greed, its thoughtfulness, its destructiveness, its blindness, and, as any New Yorker will tell you, its filth." However, by 1927, all of New York City's oyster beds were closed, mainly due to heavily polluted waterways. The harbor would remain toxic until 1971, with the passage of the Clean Water Act, which prohibited the dumping of waste and raw sewage into the harbor.
So, in addition for oysters to improve the water quality, they're also really important for mitigating or decreasing erosion. So a lot of the coastline in New York City are heavily eroded by past storms, by regular waves crashing onto them. But there's oyster and oyster reefs where that's the habitat for them, can help lessen the wave energy onto an oncoming shoreline. So a lot of areas, and there's thoughts to bring this to here, is to build back oyster reefs to mitigate erosion of our shorelines.
What is the current situation in harvesting oysters for food for restaurants? Are too many being taken from the ocean?
Mm-hmm.
And is the water even clean enough for humans to eat them around New York City?
Sure. So first and foremost, you cannot and should not eat oysters from the city. A lot of the times when restaurants serve oysters, they're usually from another location. Most of the time it's from Cape Cod, just because it's a little closer.
Can oysters significantly help clean the water of pollutants and help just make the water cleaner for New York City?
Yeah, so the oysters can filter about 30 to 50 gallons of water a day, which is a really impressive number. And they really can have a huge impact on water quality. There are a lot of places around the East Coast, I think Chesapeake Bay, they're trying to bring back oysters to improve our water quality. And there are attempts to do that here. So there are folks like Billion Oyster Project, who we partner with, who are working to bring oysters back into New York City to help clean our waters. In particular, Jamaica Bay has had issues with water quality, and so folks like Billion Oyster Project, our organization, Science and Resilience Institute, Department of Environmental Protection, are thinking about new ways to improve water quality in addition to the wastewater treatment plants. And so oysters are one of those methods to help increase the water quality of Jamaica Bay.
Okay.
The Billion Oyster Project, now that water quality is finally improved in New York City, has an ambitious goal of making New York City the oyster capital that it once was. By collecting used oyster shells from restaurants around the city, the shells are cleaned and oyster larvae put on the shells so they can be returned to the water. Marine biologists have found that new oysters flourish where old oysters currently live. With this discovery, Billion Oyster Project has a goal to distribute 100 acres of reefs by 2030, making New York Harbor the most productive water body in the North Atlantic, just as it once was in the 1700s and 1800s. New York City can once again be the oyster capital of the world.
She's terrible. She's terrible.
No.
You took
Yeah, perfecto.